Greetings, my name is Vincent and welcome to Bunker 6. This is Battlefleet Gothic. This is Battlefleet Gothic. But this is much bigger Battlefleet Gothic. And in the next couple of episodes, I'm going to show you how I built, assembled, and painted this beast of a model here at Bunker 6. I seem to have a natural affinity for anything that Andy Chambers puts his hands on, and Battlefleet Gothic is no exception. This tabletop wargame ran from 1999 to 2013, and it's one of my favorites. In this episode, we're going to be painting a custom model that is inspired by Andy Chambers' work from Battlefleet Gothic. Let's begin. If you would like one of these models yourself, please get in touch with me on my Discord, and I will send you a link to the artist and designer who created them. Now, as you can see, it has some very clear and crisp instructions that were very easy to follow. A majority of the details have already been baked into the sculpt themselves, so you're only really having to be left with some big chunky parts to glue together. Now, I did buy this model at a discounted rate from the normal price because the model did have imperfections. That is not to say anything about the quality of model that you will receive if you buy one. I just chose to buy a cheaper version, and there was one part that was missing that I remade in Plastruct, which I show you how I do in this video. And just as a little extra touch, I've added some original Battlefleet Gothic parts, just as little sprinkles across this model. Now, this is a resin model, so you can have issues like this where you get some bubbles and you get some seam lines sometimes, but we can just easily fill these in with some green stuff putty and we'll be on our way in no time. Now, as I mentioned, this is a resin model, so if you don't know, always be aware that this is not like plastic. You do not want to be breathing in any of the particulates of resin. Always wear a mask if you're doing any sanding or cutting with resin. Now we're done with the repairs, we're going to be moving on to some of the sub-assembly. The model was sub-assembled because throughout the painting process, the handle that I created to paint this model changed 3 different times, so I didn't want to have too much attached all at once to create more problems for myself. Sometimes when you have imperfections, you want to keep things accurate, or you might want to improvise. In this particular instance, I chose to improvise where there was a nodule missing, and I replaced it with one of the plastic accessory aerials from the original Battlefleet Gothic sets, and I think it's a nice little addition. I add a few of these aerials across the ship just to give it a bit more detail. Now, of course, this is a plastic aerial, but it's going into resin, therefore you still have to use superglue. Plastic glue will not work. And apart from these very intricate little aerials that I've decided to add myself, the original design, I cannot express enough how easy it was to assemble. I mean, it is like beginner's level of ease. That is not a slight on the designer. I think it's actually a wonderful accomplishment to make a model that finishes off looking as complex as it does, but has such a simple building process. I think that's a really, really cool touch. And this model was put together in less than 10 minutes. Apart from this bit, there was a little section here, as you can see, that was missing. I think it was snapped and just was lost in the process of being packaged. But I decided I'd use this as a challenge to make into my own little version. And I'm using a material called Plastruct, which is a type of thin plastic, and I am bonding multiple sheets of Plastruct together to recreate the part that is missing. Now I have to stack these sheets of Plastruct together in order to get the same width that the original part would have had. As you can see, I'm measuring that here. I'm a little bit too thick there, so I've got to take one of the sheets out accordingly until I get to the right width of the original part. Stick them together, measure up, that looks good. So now we get to the mastery that is Plastruct glue. This stuff is not like plastic glue or super glue. It is a watery substance, and it works very differently to most glues that you're familiar with. This styrene glue actually sits between cracks and leaches itself into creases and bonds the plastic together by melting it. You can spread it over like I'm doing here, but you have to work very quickly because this styrene glue evaporates very rapidly. Now, as you can see, I'm stacking the layers. If you're a scratch builder, you're probably very familiar with this process. Now, as you can see, I'm lining things up. I have the right width of plastic that I need, and I'm now going to move on to the finer details. Now I'm cutting through 4 layers of Plastruct plastic here, so I'm using this white tack just to give myself a bit more grip as I'm pushing down quite hard on this blade, and I don't want any messy accidents. Always take your time when you're doing multiple stacks of Plastruct with an X-Acto knife. Do not rush, otherwise you will end up with problems. Any time that I felt comfortable with an edge, I'd move to a sand block or a file just to make some finer adjustments, and then move on to another side that needed cutting and sanding until there was nothing left apart from the blue masking tape. Making sure things line up and still look visually correct, and I'm happy with that. Now we're going to move on to the little strips that go on both sides and the edges of the missing piece. Now, although everything is being done by eye, if you're a scratch builder, you know pretty much that as soon as you've got one side of everything sorted out, it's just a case of cutting enough lengths so you have enough to match on the other side. And that's exactly what we've done here. Now, as you can see, this styrene glue just disappears the moment that you've added it, and it will dry with basically barely any scarring at all. And if you do have any scarring, you can always just sand it down a little bit and get yourself in the clear. Now I trim all the excess bits off, repeat the pattern on the other side, and move on to some minor details. As you can see, the part is pretty much exactly the same as the original, but the only difference is it's made out of styrene Plastruct plastic instead of the original resin. Now I do add this little aerial here, but sadly it doesn't survive the painting process, but this is a good shot of the final piece. Initially, I was only going to glue 3 sections together. I was going to have the rear section of the hull, the front section of the hull, and the engines all separate from each other. But I realized because this is such a large model, I wanted to make sure that the paint was continuous and there wasn't any variations between the paint jobs. So I decided to glue all of the main hull together just to stop myself from having 2 different types of yellows as I was going. Yellow's quite a tricky color to paint at the best of times, and I actually did stop this paint job halfway through and start over again with an entirely different paint process. But I'm not showing that here. I will only be showing the successful paint job to save everyone's time and sanity, including my own. And despite the size and scale of this model, we're practically finished with the assembly already. And I'm not kidding when I say this nearly took under 10 minutes to do. I would have done it in under 10 minutes, but of course filming had to be done too, so I had to set up all my shots for each piece that was being added. But as you can see, it's very, very simple, even the fact that it's a resin model. And the quality of this model is fantastic, despite it being a miscast version. And now I'm just adding a couple of final personal touches, for example these little turrets that came from the Imperial Naval plastic accessories set of the original 1999 metal models, and the aerials that you've already seen. The only thing missing from this is the engines and rear fins, which means this model gets even bigger in the next episode. Well, there you go, part 1, the assembly of the Space Marine Strike Cruiser. I hope you enjoyed it, and if you want to see part 2, which will be coming up very shortly, and you're not subscribed, please consider subscribing if this is kind of your thing. But until next time, I'm Vincent, signing off from here at Bunker 6. And if you'd like to see your artwork featured at the end of one of my Bunker 6 videos, please submit it to the Bunker 6 Discord.